Welcome, everyone. My name is Margaret Ann Smith. I'm a cattle producer and order buyer from Virginia and currently serve as chairman of the National Cattlemen's Beef Association Livestock Marketing Council. The NCBA Livestock Marketing Council is the group of livestock auction market operators, order buyers, and marketing professionals that participate in the NCBA policy development process. I'm pleased to welcome you to NCBA's webinar on what is a timely topic with many producers currently marketing or preparing to market their spring calf crop. The title of the webinar this evening is Strategic Considerations for Cattle Marketing. As a participant, your line will be muted, but feel free to type in questions in the question box on your screen. At the end of the presentation, questions will be moderated to presenters by Jesse Fulton, part of the NCBA producer education team. If you have trouble with your technology, or if you are joining us only for the audio, the webinar is being recorded and will be available for viewing in a few days at beefusa.org. With several speakers joining us from across the country, bear with us as we change control of the presentation during the course of the webinar. There may be a brief pause in the discussion. We have an outstanding lineup of speakers who will provide the most up-to-date information on cattle marketing and marketing trends. Our speakers tonight include Danny Jones, President of Superior Livestock Auction; Jim Robb, Director and Senior Agriculture Economist of the Livestock Marketing Information Center. But we'll start our discussion tonight with David Trowbridge, who is the President of the Certified Hereford Board and President-elect of the Iowa Cattlemen's Association. Mr. Trowbridge, the floor is now yours.
Okay, did we get it up on the screen then?
Yes, David, you're good to go.
Good to go. Okay. Hello. I would like to thank Josh and Jesse for inviting me to speak tonight. Those of you that know me know I can talk about cattle and the cattle industry all day, but I'm going to see how I do talking to this machine tonight. We'll go from there. I'm going to look at this from a feeder's perspective because that's what I've been doing the last 40 years is feeding cattle. But I know most of the viewers tonight are cow-calf producers. From your perspective, I want to look at some of the factors that you can control to add value to your calves for a feeder. The more of these factors that you can actually document for the feeder, the better you can market your program. And I think that's an important thing is to market your program. I always preach about being able not just to sell your calves, but to market your program. Past performance is the ultimate assessment of the value of to a feeder. We have all heard same guy buys my calves every year. That buyer has had to have assessed several things about your calves directly or indirectly. He is assessing the combination of inputs that creates performance that you have done on your operation to create the value in your calves. The business model that we use at Gregory's is mainly a retained ownership program, but what we're trying to do there is the same thing that you are trying to do to market your feeder cattle. What we're trying to do is analyze several factors that affect the individual producer's herd profitability. So we are tearing down each of those operations into details from the production of the calves, but all the way to the packer. We do this by collecting data on every individual calf within a lot. And then we analyze this data to define which practices will improve profitability within that individual producer's herd. We do this through a system that we've put together over the years called the Gregory Performance Management Program. And within that program, we collect this data from the producer's breeding program all the way to the packer. And one of the areas that we look at is management practices, and that is management practices all the way back on the ranch. One important thing that we look at is the vaccination programs. We look at whether they're used killed or modified live vaccines. We look at whether that is done by a vet and certified or is done by the producer. We look at the timeliness of that program. We look at several things on the vaccination programs to analyze which is most effective. We also look at the nutrition. We look at creep feeding, how that affects average daily gain and feed conversion in the feedlot. And we also look at that, how it affects the marbling and the carcass qualities at the packer level. We also look at fetal programming on cows as far as supplementation of cows' diets at certain times of the gestation cycle. We have done quite a bit of work with mineral programs on cows as far as inorganic or organic mineral product, trace mineral products, and looking at how that affects the performance within the feedlot and also how the cattle grade coming off those programs. We've done some grass management as far as nutrition of the grass and how the grass is managed on the cows and on the calves while they're on the cows. We also look at weaning time. How long is the best length of time to wean the calves, how the calves are fed during the weaning process, how they're implanted. Makes all those things make a difference. That can be measured within the feedlot if we know that information. The next place we look at on the Gregory Management Program is we look at genetic selection, and we analyze the EPDs of the sires and the dams if we can, coming off of different programs. One of the things we've seen is about a 75% correlation from EPDs to the actual performance of the calves. And you guys see that with calving ease numbers. You're selecting bulls with calving ease numbers. You see that readily there. You also see it with weaning weight EPDs. And you also see it with docility scores that are easily measured on your operations. In our operation, we see it in growth, average daily gain. We see it in feed conversion, how the EPDs affect feed conversion. And we also see it in all the carcass traits, and adds a lot of value to cattle on grid programs that we can actually measure and determine value for feeder calves based on how they're going to do on grids. We look at AI cattle compared to pasture-bred cattle. We've seen some differences there. We've looked at several crossbreeding programs from across the country and how those different crossbreeding programs affect the performance in the feedlot. We use some sire summaries to look at how sires and other operations have performed, and we also look at disposition because it makes a big difference in the feedlot. I believe that marketing your genetic program is a huge factor to a feeder's assessment of your product. To be able to know what these calves are coming out of and what these EPDs are, we can determine the market, how we're going to market those cattle when they come to us. Several breed programs are now marketing cattle or helping producers market cattle using sire EPDs to help market those cattle. The next thing we do is we collect a lot of carcass data. We look at all these things here that should say hot carcass weight on there. We look at dressing percentage. We look at back fat thickness as a huge indicator of whether how much weight we can put on these cattle and whether the cattle are over finished or under finished by back fat. Of course, we look at yield grades. We look at quality grades, ribeye size and ribeye size compared to the body weight. We look at marbling scores, a big indicator of premiums based on grids, And of course, we look at CAB and CHB premiums. We look at the individual performance on these cattle also, daily gain, and individual carcass data along with individual performance is the ultimate assessment of your production model. Having past performance to show to a buyer, a closeout from a feedlot, and how those cattle did is a great marketing tool to add value to your product. The way that we measure performance in the feedlot is a formula called the retail value per average day on feed. And this is a measurement of the red meat production of cattle that were yield on the red meat yield using the percent retail product equation. And this results, in a monetary basis and of how these cattle are gaining every day. I'll show you an example of one group of cattle here in a second. But the relationship between retail value per day on feed is highly significant and accounted about 74% of the variation in profitability in the group of cattle.
What are you working on?
I'm doing a presentation.
Huh?
I'm doing a presentation. So this is an example here of retail value per day on age. And this is an example just of some sires that we did. And we analyzed for a producer. It was 126 head of calves in one lot came from one producer. And this is just an analysis dividing up by sire types or sire within that group. This happens to be a couple of different breeds of cattle on a crossbreeding program. And you can see on the average, the top 10%, their average daily value that they were adding to on feed, that these cattle were adding $5.46 a head a day value to every day they're on feed. And on the bottom 10%, they were only averaging $3.06. And this is just within one, an assessment within one group of calves that all had the same management techniques used on them from the producer all the way to the feedlot. But the difference is the sires that they came from. We analyze these factors here to determine how much each one of these calves are worth here to the producer. Now, you as a cow-calf producer need to analyze and document each of these processes that are on your operation, and then market your program through that. We've all heard seed stock producers say, you're not buying a bull, you're buying a program. Well, as a feeder, I'm not buying a 600-pound calf from you, I'm buying your program, because everything you put into that program on your calf affects my bottom line when I buy that calf. It's the details that are put into your program make this difference. And the more I know about your program, the greater the value your product has to me, and the marketing of your program adds value to your calves for yourself. In conclusion here, I'll just say the top 10% of those calves value was $2.40 a day more than the bottom 10%. So the top 10% was worth an average of $494 per head difference to the feedlot when they were fed. The top 10% of the calves average daily gain was 1.5 pounds greater than the bottom 10%. And if you put that into numbers, the break even for the feeder on a 700-pound calf that was in that example, the top 10% were worth $1.70 a pound, which would be $1,190 per head. The bottom or the top 60% were worth $1.38 or $968, and the bottom 10% were worth $1 even, or $697 per head. And this is just looking at one part of a management program and putting it in that progress. And this is really the future of the cattle business, because we all have the technology now to track this stuff and to keep track of it and to use it to buy feeder cattle. We know where the cattle are coming from and how we can how much we can pay for these calves. So all this is a little bit of what we do here to analyze the value of feeder calves, and I think that's the end of my presentation. Margaret, are you there?
It's me right now. Dave, just give me 1 second. I'm trying to pass it off.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Okay, are we up?
Good to go. Just need to put in presentation mode.
Okay. Just let me know when you're ready.
You're good to go, Danny. You just need to put your slideshow in presentation mode.
Okay, is that show screen?
Just hit F5 on your computer.
Okay. Okay, ready to go? Okay.
Yep.
I'd like to start by thanking everyone for tuning in and thank NCBA for the opportunity to be a part of this. I want to start before I get to my subject right quick and reiterate what Dave was saying. We see the truth of that every day at Superior Livestock, that we see return and repeat buyers buying the same calf crop, 10, 12, 15 years in a row. And they wouldn't do that if they hadn't learned something about the cattle. We're firm believers that good genetics, good programs pay, and that buyers come back for those. So just want to reiterate what Dave had to say there and thank him for his presentation. My topic is a little less exciting. It's talking about cattle price slides, and it is a subject of considerable confusion. If you deal with slides every day, it becomes second nature and not that complicated. But if you deal with it once or twice a year as a producer, and just when at the time that you sell your calves and you write a forward contract and it has a slide in it, it can be a little bit like smoke and mirrors for sure. And if you don't deal with it every day, it can be confusing. If it is confusing for you, we hope that we can help everyone tonight to see how slides work for both parties, for the buyers and the sellers, and do some really significant good things. The definition of a cattle price slide is it's just a defined price adjustment mechanism in a contract for the purchase of cattle for future delivery, designed to equitably deal with the variances in weight from the contract weight to the base weight, from the contract base weight to the actual weight. Again, we do the best job we can to estimate what based on past performance, test weights, and visual inspection, what the base weight is going to be. But with variances in weather, especially on cattle that are a little further out, there will be some variance in that, and the slide is designed to equitably deal with that for both parties' sake. They are based, the level of the slide is based on the market conditions at the time of the contract. Again, designed to be equitable to protect both parties. What is the value of the slide? Why is a cattle price slide needed in a forward contract? It allows buyers and sellers to take advantage of forward marketing opportunities by reducing the uncertainty of the weight at delivery. And the important thing about that is that in more years than not, 2015 and 2016 being prime examples, selling spring-born calves in the summer for fall delivery, whether weaned or unweaned, has been a significant advantage. We've seen prices drop dramatically from summer to fall, and we see buyers wanting to secure their inventories in a competitive summer market when there are more cattle available to be sold for forward contract. And it's been a significant advantage the last couple of years, and in more years than not, to get those cattle sold ahead of time while buyers are looking to secure their inventories and picking through the best calves that are out there. So we see that the slide is necessary in order to account for and deal with those weight variances from estimated base weight to delivery weight. And without that slide, neither party could afford the risk of weight variance from the contract to the base weight. So it is designed to equitably deal with that. There are various slides out there. At Superior Livestock, we use all three slides that we know of. Those slides, most common is the conventional slide. We also have what we call the Superior Right slide, and we'll go through each of these in detail. And then there's also exists TwoWay Slide, and we do offer all three kinds of slides at Superior. Beginning with the conventional slide, which is what most people are most familiar with, and on a conventional slide, the amount of the slide, it shows 16 cents in the box there. It varies with market conditions, with cost of gain, and with the price of cattle. That can vary up and down, but it's set again at the time of the sale, not at the time of the delivery. So you know what it is going into it. If the average weight is over the base weight, the price per hundredweight will be adjusted by the amount stated in the lot information for every pound over that weight on the total net pounds. An example of the conventional slide: a load of steer calves with a base weight of 500 pounds sell for $1.80. A hundredweight at delivery, they can weigh up to 500 pounds, and the price will not change. If they weigh, for example, 510 pound average with a 16-cent slide, the price is adjusted to $1.7840, and the math is shown there below. You just take the contract price and you reduce that by the amount of the slide times the weight variance. So instead of $1.80, this set of calves with a 16-cent slide, 10 pounds overweight, the price would be reduced to $1.7840. And we find that many times when a producer, again, doesn't deal with this on a regular basis, and they see that their price can slide from $1.80 and they only got paid $1.7840, it's important to keep in mind that while that is true, that the price did slide down, the cattle still brought more dollars. And so you see at 500 pounds at $1.80, the calves would bring $900. And on the actual weight at delivery, if they paid on 510 pounds, even though the price slid to $178.40, they brought $9.84 per head more. And that will remain true as you go through further examples of being overweight. Again, 500 pounds, bringing $900, and you can see the increments there all the way down to 550 pounds would slide a total of $8, which 50 pounds is 16 cents of hundredweight, and that's $1.72, but still bringing $946. The heavier they are, the more they bring, even though the price moves backwards. Designed to, again, to protect both parties. Okay, the Superior Right Slide. This was new a couple of years ago, and it was developed at a time when prices had soared to record heights beyond what anyone had imagined, quicker than anyone had imagined, and because of that, the conventional slides that were being used in the country were rarely adequate. Really, they weren't high enough. And rather than try to convince everyone how much they needed to raise their slides, we opted to offer another option, which we call the Superior Right Slide. And it is just basically if the average weight is over the base weight, the additional pounds will cost a fixed amount. At this current time, we've got it at 70 cents per pound. And an example of that would be a load of steer calves, the same calves at 500 pounds at $1.80 at delivery if they weigh 525. So now we're 25 pounds overweight, over the estimated weight. And with a 70-cent right slide, you would still get paid $1.80 at 500 pounds. And for the additional pounds, 25 cents a pound, $25 a hundredweight over, which would be an additional $17.50 or $917.50 at 525. If you want to back into what that slid the price, you can do that with just taking the total dollars divided by the pay weight, and you come up with $174.76. One of the advantages of the right slide is it is very easy to understand. For a producer that doesn't deal with a slide every day, it's you just get paid the exact contract price all the way up to the base weight, and then if you come in heavy, then you get 70 cents a pound for every pound over that. And some producers really like that because it's very easy to understand. The two-way slide has been around for quite some time, and it obviously, as the name indicates, it goes both ways. The price increases if the cattle come in light, and it decreases if the cattle come in over within a 50-pound window. So the cattle sold on a two-way slide would have a 25-pound weight stop over the base weight and 25-pound price slide stop under the base weight. And we'll look at a couple of examples on that. Again, if the cattle come in over the base weight, up to from 1 to 25 pounds over the base weight, it works just like the conventional slide. So again, with a 25-pound stop over. If the cattle weighed 180, or excuse me, weighed 500 pounds, again at a price of $1.80, it would work again just like the conventional slide. For 10 pounds at 16-cent slide, that would be $1.60, and so $1.60 a hundredweight off, so you'd be at $178.40. 25 pounds would be $4 off, and that would put the price at $176. And for pounds over, 25 pounds over though, those pounds are not paid for. They are with a weight stop. The payment stops at 525 pounds on this particular case. So if they weigh 535 or 550, the price would remain the same per head. But the heavier they are, the lower the price per hundredweight because of the free pounds. You might say, well, why in the world would anyone put a weight stop on their cattle? If you know that those cattle are going to be based on past averages or test weights or so forth, visual inspection, you feel like they're gonna be well under the 525, but sure enough going to weigh 5. Putting a 25-pound weight stop is very attractive to a buyer, so it's something you might really want to consider. We see weight stops bringing premiums, and you know, if you've got a really good idea where the cattle are going to come in, it's a very good idea. If the cattle come in under the 500 pounds, from 1 to 25 pounds under the base weight, the price per hundredweight will be increased by the amount stated in the lot information for every pound under the base weight. So it works just like the upslide to the downside. So the if you come in 10 pounds light, we'll just go through an example. 500 pound cattle at 180 again, come in 10 pounds light at 490 with a 16-cent slide. Price would increase $1.60, and so 180, 160, still less dollars, just like on the previous examples where the heavier cattle always bring more dollars even though the price goes down. The cattle on the two-way slide cost more per pound when they come in light, but they still bring less dollars. So it is a very fair and equitable way. And one other advantage, I'll talk about the advantage of the two-way slide. It does encourage an accurate base weight. There's no temptation to fudge a little bit to one side or the other, because if you're trying to hit it right in the middle and you've got 25 pounds either way, that does encourage that to go that way. Disadvantage of there's advantages and disadvantages to these. The right slide is equitable and it's easy to understand. The conventional slides have been around for a long time, and as long as it's priced right, it's a good mechanism. The two-way slide is certainly equitable. The only caution that I would have to give based on experience would be that the two-way slide, there are some buyers that don't want the risk of the under, because the other slides don't have that. And if they back off from bidding on those cattle in a public bidding format, then it could be that if you lose some bidders on the cattle because of that type of slide, then it may cost you more than it was worth. The protection of, if the cattle come in light, getting a little bit back in price. And again, with a 25 pound stop down, if they come in more than 25 pounds light, the price does not continue to go up past 25 pounds down. So there's a helpful calculator that Margaret put me onto online. This is real easy. If you want to write that down, that website, you can just plug your weight, original price, and your weight in, and your pay weight, and it will do that calculation. You can play with that and get a little more experience with it. So it's again, slides are not terribly complicated if you deal with them all the time, but it can be if you just see it once in a while. The advice that I would have from Superior Livestock on slides is, don't be afraid to offer an attractive slide to buyers in a public bidding format, because it will pay you well to have a good slide, either a good value associated with the slide or the right slide, or if you use a two-way slide, just whatever you do, it pays to make it attractive to the buyer, because ultimately what's going to matter most to you is getting all the price you can out of your cattle. And the slide, if the slide works, if you give a lucrative, generous slide, it will.
Hi, this is Jim Robb. I guess I'm on now. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Pleasure to be with you today. Livestock Marketing Center has been operating for over 60 years. We work with land-grant universities, USDA, and major livestock commodity groups. It's going to be kind of fast and furious here today. We're going to talk about the drivers in the marketplace, a little bit about demand, a little bit about supply and prices. All the data are from USDA sources. You might want to consider that. Those are important sources to help markets work and to help you all get your jobs done. So apparently now we're changing around here. All the forecasts are from our shop. First of all, I want to back up a little bit and say we hear a lot of complaints about retail prices. We have to remember in this industry that it costs quite a bit more to produce beef on the blue line and than it does broilers on the dotted line or pork on the red line. And so consumers better find a value that's much higher than chicken or pork, or we won't be in business. So this is an industry about selling product to consumers, and incomes of consumers are very important, both domestically and foreign. This is an industry about feeding growing incomes around the world. Now we'll kind of switch to the economic forces at play, and to an economist, that's supply and demand. The demand side of the world is driven by consumers. It does filter down, and demand for meat eventually becomes demand for cattle, especially fed cattle, and then feeder cattle, and then breeding stock. This is actually a picture of retail prices from 10 years ago. You can see those are about the same. So we're going to talk about the demand side first. The demand side is one of the points is consumers don't care about your cost of production. It is really their game, and we live in that world. This is per capita beef consumption on the blue bars, and this has gone down over time, and we can see that in this trend. And so the point is that per capita consumption is not demand. Per capita consumption is largely what we have available in the marketplace, but it does not really tell us anything about the price of the product. And so demand is much more complicated than a simplistic look at per capita consumption. The reason we're going to ramp up here in coming years, and we're ramping up this year, is that we're simply producing more beef in the United States. If we look at demand, it also has this price dimension, and we look at that often as an index. And this is the 84 on the right is the latest quarter, the second quarter of this year. This is not as bad as it looks. 84 is still better than most of the last 10 years. There's a lot of data issues here. And we have had very good demand for cattle. And there's a big gap between consumer demand and demand for cattle. We have lots of retailers featuring product. We have lots of retailers selling beef as a loss leader because they're very concerned about using it to get people into their stores. But this demand profile is still the top three of the last 10 years. This is a good demand profile at the consumer level, but again, it does not tell the whole story. And we've seen that recently with very good demand for slaughter cattle, even better than the demand for beef at the retail case. But overall, this is a good story and much better than several years ago. The other big component of demand is exports. The export markets are a key component of demand for U.S. product. For those of you that are interested in pictures, the upper left-hand corner picture there is of the Western feedlot in Canada that shut down last summer, 100,000 head feed yard, no longer in existence. U.S. beef exports on the blue line this year, latest data is through May. Dotted line is last year, red line's prior 5-year average. Beef exports have been very good, and that has certainly been part of the reason we've had a very strong cattle market. No two ways about it. As we look ahead for the balance of this year, and we can see for those of you that remember history, prior to BSE, we had a BSE wreck. Then we had a decline here and ups and downs, and we really haven't been back to 2011 levels in terms of total beef exports. This little bit of decline in 2016 or 2015 doesn't look like a lot, but for the industry, that was $1.5 billion that really didn't happen in the industry that year because of lack of exports. So that $1.5 billion has come back into the marketplace in 2016 and has continued to grow here in 2017 and has really helped mitigate the decline in cattle prices compared to what would have been the case elsewise. As you can see, our forecast is that in 2018, we'll actually eclipse the best year ever in terms of beef export tonnage. Now, this does not include variety meats and lots of other important components, but that's a very strong profile. The other component is the U.S. also imports beef. It tends to be different product than what we export. These numbers on the right-hand side on the blue bars do include what we expect to be imported from Brazil, even though that's changed lately. The point is it's going down. And so the net trade position has actually been a very positive force compared to 2015 and the cattle market that we had 2015 and 2016. So some of these things are shaping up quite a bit differently over the next couple of years and have already shaped up differently in the first half of 2016 than we've had recently. The other component of demand, when we look at it from a beef industry perspective, is how competitive the competing meats are in the marketplace. Now, again, there are very large normal differentials, but especially when we have economic slowdowns and in the export markets, these export customers, if we think of Mexico, South Korea, et cetera, they're much more price sensitive than U.S. consumers are. So we'll take a quick look at competing meats. And the point is here that on the red bar, that we had a real ramp up in terms of broiler production in 2016, 2017, and again, but the rate of growth, and it's the change in something that causes prices to change, is really moderating. So the big surge in broiler production in the United States, it will continue to grow in our forecast, but not near the big jump up that we had compared to the 5-year average of 2011 to 2015. Similar story on pork, although more growth there than on the chicken side, actually, as we look ahead. But importantly on pork is that the pork industry is essentially, year to date, exporting all of their increase in domestic production. The beef industry has not been able to do that, and the chicken industry has been well behind the curve and not able to do that. So even though U.S. pork production's up, per capita supply has been greatly mitigated by the very robust pork exports. So, you know, you don't have to always just look at the simple story. We'll put all the puzzle together on total red meat and poultry supplies. This is growing. This is probably the biggest concern overall in the marketplace. It's just the sheer amount of tonnage the market must absorb. Again, population's growing, exports are growing. If all those work in our favor, it helps mitigate it, but clearly we are in for a couple more years where total red meat and poultry production in the United States will continue to ramp up. Switching to cattle, you thought we'd never get there. We're going to review prices here for a moment, starting with the 5 to 6 weight steer calves in the Southern Plains. The blue line is this year. We're now slightly above last year. We think this will trail along near last year. We don't expect necessarily that we have the huge debacle that we had back in 2015 to reoccur. But you never know. This is a very fickle marketplace, and that's our general tone of that situation. And somehow we've lost our screen, but that's always interesting. So maybe he won't do that again. Well,
Thank you to all our present. Oh.
Well, I guess since the PowerPoint has blown up here, I'll jump to the end of my presentation and talk about the drivers in the marketplace. And so the drivers in the marketplace in terms of producer decision making, we expect cattle prices to be above a year ago for calves for the balance of this year. Not a lot, but a little bit. Same for 7 to 8 weight steers. But there's risk always in the marketplace. And part of it is the fed cattle side. We've had the best 6 months, 6 consecutive months in cattle feeding that we've had in the history of the U.S. industry. Now, if we adjust for inflation, it's only been the best since 1975. But that's a long time. So the cattle feeding sector has really turned the corner, and that's been supportive of calf and yearling prices. But now we've essentially bid all the profitability of cattle feeding back into calf and yearling prices. So we're going to mitigate the future upside in these prices. Second important thing to note is that we are swimming upstream. In other words, this year's calf crop is bigger than last year. 15 was bigger than 14. 17 will be bigger than 16, and 18 will be bigger than 17. So as you're swimming upstream in the marketplace, you will find that you have to plan differently. When you have higher supplies ahead, it's much different than when every year, like in 12, 13, 14, when the supplies were smaller every year ahead, you're swimming downstream and your marketing plan is much easier. But when you're swimming upstream, it's a much more challenging situation. So, and that's the market that we're in at this point in time. It appears that I'm still frozen, so we'll continue on here. So we're in an environment of marketing calves upstream, and marketing calves upstream means that I have to be much more nimble. If I go to the video auctions this year and I get a bid, I don't want to necessarily pass on the bid like many people did last year and the year before to their disappointment. Again, remember there's a larger calf crop ahead. If you're in a drought like in North and South Dakota, eastern Montana, we have to act quicker rather than slower because the next calf crop is bigger than the last calf crop. And so it's not like in a drought where the cattle supplies are already tightening. So we have to act quicker and more decisively. Let's say, for example, if the U.S. corn crop starts to have problems this year. Overall, the stocker programs are working much better than they have in recent years. And that is because the markets have adjusted already to the situation that we have. So if we have that kind of environment, we expect that much like here we've had in 2017, these stocker programs will work better than they did in 2015 and 2014. And then about the what ifs. The what ifs are always important. And so again, swimming upstream, we have to plan a little bit more on our marketing plan. We have to be a little bit more nimble. We have to recognize that we have a couple more years of this. The cow herd, USDA will put out numbers here on Friday, and USDA's numbers will likely show, even though they did not do a mid-year report last year, that the overall size of the calf crop is increasing year over year again in 17. Again, exports are important. All these factors come together. The point is that we need to be marketing rather aggressively until we turn the corner, which is probably still a year or two away, where we fundamentally have year over year increases in calf prices coming back in the marketplace. So sorry about the PowerPoint blowing up, but I guess I'm done.
Thanks, Mr. Robb. Sorry about your presentation. Many thanks to all of our presenters. One of the things NCBA does best is to bring thought leaders together from across the cattle industry and provide the best information to cattlemen. I think we've achieved those goals tonight with a great webinar. While Jesse is preparing to moderate our Q&A, I want to remind everyone that this webinar is provided free by NCBA as a service to the industry. If you are an NCBA member, I want to thank you for your investment in the future. If you aren't, we'd love to have you join us in advocating for a profitable future for cattlemen. Visit us online at www.beefusa.org for more information on NCBA or NCBA Livestock Marketing Council membership. Jesse, I'll hand it over to you for the Q&A.
Alrighty, thank you, Margaret Ann. I'd just like to remind attendees if they just type in the questions they would like to ask in the question box below. I'll moderate those over to our attendees. I already have a couple here. Question for Dave. Dave, you mentioned many different management practices like creep feeding, weaning, nutrition, etc. What does the ultimate set of calves that a feeder is looking for look like?
That's a pretty tough question, and that varies greatly by the different feedlots that are feeding the cattle. That's why it's important that you keep track of and document what you're doing and present that in a marketing fashion. But just speaking for me, we like to see calves that have had some creep feed. We like to see calves that are weaned 45 days. We like to see calves that have 2 rounds of modified live vaccine, calves that are eating good, because we're looking for a high-end calf that's going to go to a grid market and look for premiums. So it may vary, it may be different for another feedlot, but whatever you're doing in your management practices, there's a feedlot out there that's looking for those kind of calves if they can document that program.
All right. Question for Danny. I assume the conventional slide is still the most used slide, but you mentioned they are seeing premiums on the right slide. Are more cosigners moving toward the right slide, and is that the recommendation you would make for a cosigner? Danny, if you're there, you might need to unmute your phone. We can't hear you.
Okay, are we good there?
Yep, can hear you now.
Sorry about that. Yes, we saw more of a premium back in 2015 and 16 on the right slide because the prices, particularly 2015 when the prices were extremely high, consigners were slow to move toward, probably because of the lack of understanding of how slides work. They didn't move up commensurate with cattle prices, so the right slide was more of a premium at that time because the conventional slides weren't up to par. So as the prices came down, the premiums for the right slide still existed, but were smaller than they were when prices were high. There's absolutely nothing wrong with any of the three slides, but they have to be appropriate for the market conditions. And we saw pretty high right slide premiums when prices were extremely high, and not as much now. But it is something that still brings a premium, but it's because I think it is fair and equitable, stays at the base price up to base weight, and pays a reasonable premium over.
Alrighty. Jim, question for you. If we look at the past few years, a cow-calf producer should be contracting his calves this time of year and not waiting any longer. Is that going to be the same case again this year?
Yeah, this is the story of how prices move cyclically through the cattle cyclical aspects. Often when prices are moving up year over year rather consistently, the highest prices can be in the fourth quarter. And we had that in 2013, 14, 15. But when prices are going down year over year, we're on the downside of the price trend, then almost always the fourth quarter is the lowest price of the year. So in terms of cash marketing, we would want to price earlier, especially when we're in this part of the price cycle. Now that's tied to the inventory, but that's the price cycle. And then, further, we can also use some risk management tools to do that, or we can just forward price, or we can put them on a video auction earlier or sell them for future delivery. So there's lots of ways to take advantage of that. And, some of those are, risk management tools, et cetera. But I think that's the general tone when you are at this point of the price cycle, is to sell earlier rather than later.
Alrighty. Dave, I had a question for you. You were talking about field programming and mineral programs. Have you looked into combining the two and doing any organic versus inorganic feeding based in fetal programming, if there were any differences in the calves, and if maybe that went on past the feedlot?
Well, we've actually done some work with the University of Florida on some calves that were from the same genetics, about 3 different generations of calves. One group was on organic trace minerals, one was on inorganic trace minerals. And we saw a difference on the Angus calves in the feedlot, both in performance and in the carcass quality of the cattle and the premiums we received on the cattle. The organic program on those calves, identical calves coming out of Florida's herd, was about 0.3 of a pound greater gain, and we had about a 10% increase in carcass quality as far as percent choice and prime. So there is a difference there, and we've even seen first and second generation difference coming out of cows that are fetally programmed out of second generations.
Alrighty, I have a question. Are you building we have a producer in Virginia, and he is wondering if you're building your buyer base in the East when purchasing cattle.
And that question was for who? I'm sorry.
I believe it's for you, Danny.
Okay. We are. We've got some new reps that are further east than we have traditionally had cattle. Of course, the larger herds in the west is why Superior was more popular in the west to begin with, and through the central part of the country. We have been moving east and have some reps over that way. So we feel like the east is definitely one of our the ways that we want to grow. We have reps in Michigan and Kentucky, Ohio, Wisconsin, and that's all newer territory for us at this point.
Alrighty. Appears that's the last of the questions that I have so far. I would just like to remind the attendees, if they have any further questions that we didn't get a chance to answer tonight, you can always email them directly here to me, and I can reach out to our presenters and get an answer for you. The email is jfulton, Fulton, @beef.org. We'll get those sent off to our presenters. This webinar was recorded and will be available online at beefusa.org. If you only participated via the phone and you need to rewatch the webinar. I'd like to thank our presenters tonight for joining us and taking time out of their busy schedule. Other than that, I will end the webinar. Thank you all.